Ladies and gentlemen, we're finally here, and I apologize for being late, but it is not without trying to pull off something new. If you're looking around, you can see Chrome is a little bit different, if we even still call it Chrome, but hey, it's a little cleaner. I think we're going to be able to do some more stuff. So welcome to lunch. Welcome to another glorious edition of, I guess we're calling it THAT.live. Today I have with me, let's see if I can do this. There we go. Today I have with me Arthur K, coming live from his HQ just up the road.
Yeah.
Arthur, how
What's up,
are
neighbor?
you?
I am good, buddy. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. Obviously, for the last half hour, we've been scrambling to try to make this all work. And that's okay because I think we have it. So if you see something in the chat or if you see something, let us know. Obviously, new look, new tools, new thing. But that's not why we're here. We are here to talk about Dino, dinosaur, however the internet wants to say it. But before we get there, Arthur, how about you explain who you are?
Who am I? It's an existential question I wasn't prepared for, Clark. I'm a software engineer and cyber security general tech enthusiast. I live in the northern Chicago suburbs, not far from you. I currently work for Cox Automotive, and in my spare time I talk at meetups and conferences and blog and do all kinds of other stuff.
Well, as a neighbor, when you say you live up the road, you definitely live just up the road.
I know. What, like an 18-hole golf course away from each other, just about?
Probably. One, welcome to the area. I mean, you didn't live far before, but you live closer now. So we're going to talk about Denio, new JavaScript tools. For those who are watching online, start throwing your questions in about what it is or what your questions are, because we're going to try to best kind of have this interactive conversation, which is why we got late. I wanted to make sure that we could see your desktop and a few other things. For a little background, Arthur and I are both JavaScript nerds. We've been doing JavaScripts for a long time. We've been playing in Node. You've been all over the place. I'm trying to think of what was the San Francisco company you're working for?
Sencha.
I was going to say Sentry, but that's not it anymore.
Close enough.
Yeah. And then you went and did some.
Yeah, I worked in cybersecurity for a few years at a company called IronNet Cybersecurity. So now I work at Cox, and all along it's been mostly, if not exclusively, web, or at least things that touch web for me. I know you're kind of the same. Yeah,
for the most part. So what got you turned on to Deno?
Well, so I forget how long ago it was that I started seeing some things in the Twitterverse about this new thing from Ryan Dahl. And for those of you who might not recognize the name, he's the original creator of Node.js. He created the project, then he left, and he went off and did some other stuff for a while. But I think in 2018 or so, he did a presentation at JSConf in Europe, I think, where he introduced this new thing called Deno, and he kind of prefaced it by saying, while I created Node, and Node obviously has been immensely successful over the years, there are things he would do differently about it, and one of those things happens to be security. And being both somebody who's interested in JavaScript and security, it really kind of piqued my interest as something that I wanted to dig further into. Because people really in all areas of tech, this isn't just exclusive to Deno specifically, but security is a topic that's all over the news, and people throw it around as if it's this magic thing you can just solve. And I think it's we're going to get into here in a little bit. Deno's got a lot of promise. I don't know if it quite lives up to everything it promises yet, but I am
no V1 does.
Really excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I am too, and I was thinking about this last night a bit, and the question that has been rolling around in my head, and it's why I haven't spent more time with it, is just, will it take off? And I say that because when it could be the best thing ever. I don't even know. But when you start thinking about where Node started and the gap that it filled, right? We didn't really have, ecosystems weren't a thing. We were all kind of looking for a better cross-platform thing. We were looking for a way to share things like modules, and that just came at a time where Node started to blow up, and it created this ecosystem of things around it. And right. I think those two things really fueled its success, right or wrong or indifferent. They also sunsetted a lot of other things. And, fast forward to now, and now you have to ask questions like, okay, Deno's great, but why not Go?
Right. Yeah.
Why, if I don't have the ecosystem, we just redid TC, and we could have gone down Deno, and we could have gone down Node and a thousand other places. Node's a little closer to kind of where we were at, but those are some of the questions that I think will kind of hamper some of that adoption. And then you have a whole nother world that's kind of coming up with Snowpack and the whole ESM, the new ESM, and being able to load that over the web, which I know Deno supports. But it's Snowpack, and I forget the other stuff that crew is working on. But that kind of changes that landscape too. And then you wonder, well, the place, do we care about that opinion? And time will tell. No, and it's kind of an interesting problem, because one thing that has been constant over, let's say, the last 10 plus years in the world of JavaScript is change, right? There's always some new JavaScript hotness, whether it's React or Angular or Vue or Node or what have you. Deno is not the only call it server-side runtime for JavaScript that's popped up over the years. We've had things like Silk.js, we've had a variety of other things, Phantom.js, and they've all been cool. But to your point, how do you know it's going to take off? Is it really solving some of the problems that people do legitimately face with Node? Node's fantastic. It's not without its flaws. And I think we have to qualify takeoff, because you don't choose tools because of popularity, but what popularity does bring is other things that help you get your job done faster. Right.
Sure.
And that's where it kind of snowballs into something that's important, right? If these things are there and supported, if the runtime's there, in AWS or there, whatever, Google or Azure land, that makes that adoption easier to go down versus for a long time. Even Google didn't support the Go runtime or the current Go runtime on Google's own servers. And it's at least on their PaaS servers, which feels like, well, if you can't do it, why should I do it? Right? That's a problem.
Yeah.
So what makes, let's get into Deno a little bit, because I have a feeling you and I could just riff on that crap for a long time. What makes Deno different?
Right. Yeah. So let's start with the marketing tagline that Deno has. If you go to their website, which is Deno.land, you'll see that the very first sentence under the logo is Deno is a secure runtime for JavaScript and TypeScript. So right out of the box, it tells you two things. Number one, it's focused on security as a top-level concern. And number two, it supports TypeScript right out of the box. There's no more Babel. There's no more, Snowpack or whatever other bundling tools you might have had to use in order to write TypeScript in Node.js. So in the Node ecosystem, there are different projects or forks that allow you to write TypeScript to build your like your Express server, let's say, if you were hosting an application. But you typically had to transpile that into raw JavaScript in order for Node's runtime to actually execute it. And Deno does that natively without having to do any transpilation. So that's a really cool thing. Deno has a pretty robust standard library compared to what exists in Node.js.
What's underneath the cover that's running it? Is it V8 still?
I believe it's still V8. I think that the last thing that I read led me to believe it was still V8, unless that's changed. But I think the underpinnings of the runtime are still the same as Node, being V8. Whether they're the same version or not, I don't actually know. I haven't dug that far into the covers.
So then what makes it more secure? The fact that TypeScript's involved? Because,
No. So some of the more famous things that have happened in the Node ecosystem over the last couple of years have involved things like packages that have been taken over. Maybe they during the build process or using things like JIP, they'll access your file system. They might try to make network requests that you're unaware of. Deno takes the approach that the file system, your network, things like that are off limits unless you explicitly grant them access.
So this is a bit like the new world that we live in for those on Mac OS, where everything's denied unless kind of explicitly granted. So
right, yeah, and in the world of cybersecurity, this is known as a default deny approach to security. And that's really the most secure posture you could have for a machine or for a server.
Sure.
So that's good.
Yeah, totally.
Deno also does things differently than Node in that there is no more build tooling when you run a package. And like if you were to npm install create React app, it's going to go through a series of JIT builds and compiling C or whatever libraries that you might go into some of that tooling. Deno only allows you to pull in TypeScript or JavaScript libraries using
the latest ESM.
Yeah. So you're using import syntax. There is no more require. Or I think it supports Rust, whereas Node.js is typically like C and C++. Deno also allows you to load files directly. Like their concept today of modules is very, very different than it is in Node, where in Node you've got a whole collection of what could be only executable code in terms of like JavaScript files plus like a package JSON. But there might also be documentation. There might be all kinds of other stuff. And as we all know, it's node modules all the way down, right?
Sure.
That doesn't exist in Deno. So you're just pulling in the resources that you need for your app, and those resources can live anywhere because again,
Right. ESM backed.
there's no npm, central repository for or a registry for all these packages, and there's certainly some debate there. But these are some of the things that make Deno a clear divergence from the Node and the npm ecosystem.
Well, and I think to be fair on the Node side of things, and this is a bit where history and timing is there, right? It's easy for Deno to take on the new ESM and enforce some of that because they're starting from ground zero. That's kind of what's appealed to me about Snowpack, and I forget the other few things around Snowpack, is they're kind of trying to re-envision how a today NPM would look like given the new ESM standards of how you can just load a module over the HTTP, right? So that changes kind of how we think about that. But then you look at Node, and they got to suffer from gigantic ecosystem. They can't just make that kind of sweeping change. Microsoft's has suffered. Any large effort suffers from. They have the Titanic to move it. And that's why you see these things kind of meander around and
Right.
come back and forth. So I think I say all that saying I'm excited about this, excited to see where that stuff goes, because the world of not having to do some of these installs and to be able to even have my own kind of published repository, if you will, for my own things that could just load on demand. That's some sexy stuff.
No, it's definitely exciting to see kind of where that all lands, because as you point out, it's new, and something that I kind of struggle with is the flip side of it, which is my knee-jerk reaction to some of these things, like not having a central registry like npm, is that going to be good for the ecosystem?
Right.
The fact that modules no longer have a meta file or manifest file like package JSON, it solves some problems, but also kind of creates other things that people either haven't thought through, or maybe the rest of us just need to wrap our heads around the new way to do it and just get convinced that it's better.
Right.
Because I think that there's a lot of those things that worry me from like a commercial or like an enterprise software perspective, where it's awesome that I can just load files over HTTP.
Well, and just because it's better doesn't mean it'll ever work out. I mean, we've seen this with Betamax and VHS back in the day. Betamax was better, but Betamax died. So great.
Yeah.
Bluetooth isn't great, but we're using them like it or not.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested to see how Node and npm respond to whatever shakes out of this exercise with Deno. Does some new version of Node, like Node 15 or something like that, is that going to start turning on those default deny permissions or whitelists for your network requests, or whitelisting areas of the computer that you want to grant your script access to? Are those things that get rolled back into Node, or does Node respond by saying that's this other thing and we don't believe in that? I'm very curious to see what happens down the road.
Yeah, and Bretsky in the chat points out and I know that he's worked a lot in Go, like not having a central repository has made it difficult to just go with the language, right? Like that repository makes it easy to go, hey, I need a thing, beep boop, and I'm off to the races and running. And
sure it does.
Early days of Node, we had problems like you liken it to DLL hell, where packages would be overwriting and get out of sync, and that's why we got the package. Well, we had shrink wrap and then package lock, and those things helped us solidify like what that world meant. But Yeah.
Right? There was that whole left tab fiasco
Oh
where
yeah. Yep.
and but on the other hand, I mean, for a while it seemed like npm only allowed you to install things from the registry, but of course now there are ways for you to consume packages, directly from GitHub, directly from other sources.
Right.
If you have your own private registries and things like that. Um, but simply finding those packages, I know that's been a struggle for the Go community. And then on the flip side of it too, you have, what if something malicious is found in the ecosystem? While
Right. Then what?
npm might not be actively scanning for those things, but they always can take the action to pull a package down, or to warn the community when something gets installed and say, hey, this thing has a known vulnerability in it.
Yeah.
If you have a completely distributed ecosystem, I don't know how you're going to find the tooling to make that happen.
Well, and by the time you found it, it's arguably too late, and
Yep.
thus been distributed. So you have to bring that like way further forward in the execution cycle to say, no, like there's a problem here, which is a whole nother like ethical question of, should I, you may be all right with the fact that there's a vulnerability there because it doesn't affect you in a certain way, but then releasing control to somebody else who could just arbitrarily like knock it down, that's a problem too.
Yep.
And now the spiral just goes out of control, and it not an easy problem, and I'm glad I'm not the one solving it. So
Yeah, no kidding.
but I do like the fact that, like to your point a bit ago, now in GitHub, they've taken a very active approach of scanning your packages, letting you know if there's a vulnerability as a package owner or a repository owner. Even at a point where there's bots that will create a PR fixing your packages around for you. And like, that's some outside of the box thinking, because I know that I feel better like using GitHub, and just for the mere fact that it's like, well, I try to do the best, but stuff gets stale. So when I see a PR pop up, I'm damn sure paying attention, because I don't always pull these packages or these repos down all the time. So,
Well, sure. Well, and as somebody else who has certainly created some open source things, I mean, it's not like you're focused on one package and that's your full-time job. And
Right.
in most cases, you or I or many other people do this, where you create something that's useful all the time, and then you get distracted by this other project, or maybe you've got a full-time job, or whatever happens, and then a week goes by, a month goes by, a year goes by, and you haven't touched that code.
yep.
Right.
And a lot happens in the open source land. A lot.
Right.
For as busy as people are, man, does a lot happen. Like,
no kidding.
Packages just, they move at a rate that is staggering. Just staggering.
I mean, kudos to the people who actually are full-time contributors to some of these things out there, because I don't know how they do it.
I have a hard enough time just keeping up with them.
Yeah.
And again, another place, this is a little bit off of Deno at this point, but the ability, and I know we're guilty, right? Now that we have a lot of open source stuff, all the .NET conference stuff is open source. I know we're guilty of not having the best documentation. There is certainly, if you keep up with it, that kind of time to information yields you better results, right? Partly because of documentation and time to put all that stuff together. But having said that, the ability for people to move forward means how we structure releases and uplift our consumers means we need a really good way to say, this is a breaking change and this is how you fix it fast. Because it's not like there's just one thing, like, oh, I just got to change this one API. Like, that could be like weeks worth of work to take on that next change. And if that's a security issue, that's not good either. So we all have a little bit of responsibility in the on that side of things, but off the rails, I guess. This is me complaining now.
So yeah, I mean, coming full circle back to Deno, I think, I'm just really excited to, see how this ecosystem grows, if it does. And those specific areas that it's focusing on for security really are very interesting to me because, like, you think about things that aren't like an open source library, like your home's router, for example. Like, you typically don't do a whole lot of rule configuring on your router. Most people don't. Most people probably wouldn't really know what to do with. Now, maybe the audience watching this is a bit different because we're tech enthusiasts.
Sure.
We like to tinker with things, but I mean, generally speaking, most people just either don't know how or they're just not going to spend the time to go
right.
and think through all the different security implications. So that's the things that Deno does are really interesting to me because they really try to make it apparent what is happening during the runtime of an application. And here in a minute, we can jump into some code and actually see some of these things in action. But much like configuring your router, you need to be careful that you're not doing something that negates the built-in security for the router. Like, what I mean by that is, if you have a home router, typically you're denying most of the inbound traffic to your network.
Sure.
Or if you're at a company's network, you typically deny most kinds of traffic. But if you've got access to go in there and flip some switches, you might think that, like I need to poke a hole in the router so that I can let this one thing in. If you don't know how to still block everything else, you're going to let everything in.
Right.
And I've got an example here that I'll show in a minute where it's slightly concerning to me that Deno makes it really easy to stumble over things like that, because you think you're here using this secure environment, and it does a great job. But again, if you follow the wrong tutorial or you don't understand what's happening, it's really easy to configure that incorrectly. And that's probably my greatest concern outside of the stability or the growth of the ecosystem for something like this is simply that if it gains traction, there's going to have to be a focus on really explaining to people like how to use it correctly.
So when you say stumble, and then let's get into code, when you say stumble on, can you quantify that for me?
So in one of the scripts that I'm going to show you here, we are going to write some code that makes a network request. And by default, Deno will stop that request from happening because, again, security is baked in from the get-go. You then rerun your script using a flag to tell it to allow that network request to succeed. But if you're not specific in how you whitelist, let's say, the domain to which it can make a request to, it'll allow you to make a request anywhere. And that's probably not what you want it to do.
Right. It seems like it should be a little bit more CORS-like and lock it down.
Right. And, Deno doesn't currently have any concept of like a content security policy, or because it doesn't have like a manifest file. For those of you who might have built things like Chrome extensions, you have a manifest file in which you explicitly say what permissions you need from Chrome in order for your extension to do its thing. or if you were going to whitelist certain domains that you could access, or whitelist certain parts of your hard drive that the script could access. Effectively, what you have to do right now is do it all on the CLI that you type in to run the script. And like I said, that's kind of dangerous if somebody's just lazy or doesn't understand what they're doing, or God forbid you have like dozens of things to whitelist and you just say, the hell with it, I'm just going to open it up.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, those are the things I think that are the greatest concern to me. It's not that I love package JSON or manifest JSON. It's just that's
it's a contract.
Just the logical place to put these things, right?
I mean, it's a contract.
Yeah.
That's my contract with Node that says this is the thing that I want and how I want it to be.
Right. And like if you're going to consume it too, as a consumer of third-party code, before you even run it, you might want to go and look and say, hey, what does this thing need to access?
Yep.
And let that guide your decision to use it.
Yep, for sure. All right, well, let's try this code thing because I was busting my hump to try to see your desktop. So I have your desktop up and running. Let's see a little bit of this Deno. Now I see me. Now I see code.
Okay, so I've got 3 examples to run.
I think before you get into it, let us know in the chat, is that big enough? Because I don't know. This is a like we're breaking all kinds of ground here.
Yeah, oddly enough, I was able to
not big
increase.
Enough.
It's not big. Okay, God. Well, let's see what I can do about this here. See, I had tried increasing this, but that just increased everything that wasn't code. I don't know if that did anything.
I don't
reopen
think so.
And you know what? Let's do this the old way, Clark. Let's use the CLI. So I'm going to cat out hello world.
Yeah, bump that thing up pretty high. Keep going.
Keep going? Oh, geez.
There we go. That looks pretty good to me. How about everybody? I got an oh yeah.
All right, so let's bust out some Vim, and we'll look at a simple Hello World app, which is quite literally just a console log.
Okay.
So, right off the bat, we'll see, it's introductory level. Deno is really no different than Node. It's taking JavaScript, or in this case, it's actually running TypeScript natively. I'm not really using it in this example. And I'll run Deno run hello world, and you can see it will console log out hello world. So that's a stupidly easy example, but the hello world's the correct place to start when you're always doing something new.
Totally. So, but let's unpack that for a second. So you pass in an argument to Deno called run. So I assume then there's a lot of arguments off of Deno?
Yeah. If we look at, oops, that was not what I wanted there.
My Node world was taking me into, just Node index. And
right. So if you run --help,
yep.
Here's that tagline: secure JavaScript and TypeScript runtime. You'll see that we have a variety of other things we can do here. So we've got there's a built-in bundler, which is also kind of cool, and we didn't touch on this before, but while you don't have to use something like a Webpack to bundle your code together, if you wanted to distribute a single executable, which is one of the cool things about Deno, it makes it really easy because you can just bundle your application using the default CLI, and it'll spit out a bundled TypeScript file for you. There's some other things. Run was the one I was using, so it's to run a given file name or URL. So it's also another good point here. You could do Deno run and then point it at a URL that has a TypeScript file, and it'll just run it.
So I'm the next one down is test.
It's got built-in testing right out of the box.
Right. So, and this is where, okay, coming back to the Node ecosystem, you know, I think of things like Jest and Mocha and the different assert engines and all that. Is, while great that that's part of the runtime, it also seems like limiting in how fast one could maybe keep up with. Like, am I locked into using their testing runtime or testing
That's a good
framework?
question. Yeah, I mean, it certainly adds opinions into this runtime that perhaps you may or may not agree with, I guess,
Sure,
right?
sure.
And I haven't played with testing a whole lot so far, so honestly, I don't really know to what degree you could use other things. I mean, I imagine you could, but it certainly leads you into a de facto standard. Now, I guess Node has an assertion library too, that's built into their standard library, but it's nowhere near as robust as, let's say, Jest or Jasmine or some of these other frameworks that really allow you to combine a whole suite of tests. So
I was just curious. I didn't expect to see it there. That was the one that, like, I expected a REPL. I expected, format docs. Like, those all sound like great things. Caching, like, upgrade sounds scary as hell, but cool. I'd be curious, and it's hard for me not to compare back to Node, right? I'd be curious of the, I have, right, I use Node NV. NVM's another one where we manage what Node version we're running based upon what project and kind of bounce between those things. I assume you could have the same problem with Deno where I see the upgrade of upgrading executable, but at the same token, not everybody's
here's an interesting
going to be on the same thing.
Well, so here's an interesting point, though, and actually I ran across this in the docs. The Deno runtime is versioned differently than its standard library. So in the Node ecosystem, if you're running, let's say, Node 10, you're getting Node version 10 standard library. Well, you don't get a choice. If you're running, Deno runtime 1.0, you can pull in any specific version of a specific module, whether it's the standard library or not.
No, I think that's the way Go works too. I don't know. Bretsky, Sarah, saw Sarah's in here. I think Go does the same, but I mean, you could also argue that it's like, okay, well, like that's cool, but then I don't really worry about the V8 version that Node's running against, right? And V8 doesn't.
Right.
V8's worried about Windows and whatever kernel, and the kernel's version differently. I mean, that's layers of things, but yeah, cool. Like that seems like good hindsight.
Yeah. So in any case, there's still clearly a lot of stuff to dig into. I mean, I've only really been digging into this for maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks, but pretty hard. So I haven't hit everything, but the comparisons to Node and NPM are inevitable, right?
Oh, for sure.
It's just been around for so long.
So what's next? All right, we did Hello World.
So let's look at a different one, a different example. I'm going to pull up a web server, and this is a good example of the standard library here. So I'm pulling in this HTTP server off of deno.land, and again, so like you'll notice this is importing from a URL. It's not importing from the runtime. The rest of this will look somewhat similar to, let's say, like Express or just vanilla HTTP in Node, where you can set a port for your server to run on. I'm just going to console log out some information here, and then as I come down here, I've got a block starting at this for await here, and this is another kind of cool point about Deno is that promises are really apparent in Deno, whereas for a long time in Node, they were kind of, this like bastard child that you had to, import, I don't know, the Bluebird or something to use. I don't know, was it Bluebird or Blue Jay?
Yeah,
I
Bluebird.
forget what it was, but
I mean, a few releases ago, but yeah.
right. So now everything in Deno, I shouldn't say everything, but lots of things in Deno are just promises. So it makes for some really cool things to do where, as we're, creating the server, as the server is getting different requests into it, you can just loop over them using async await. And as these requests come in, I'm going to perform some regular expression magic just to make sure that I'm grabbing the request I care about. And I have to do this because I'm going to access this from my browser, and the browser automatically sends not only the index HTML request, but it tries to look for a favicon by default, a few other resources. So let me just fire this up, and we'll.
And you kind of touched on this. Like, I don't know that what I'm gonna say is 100% accurate, but I believe that it would be. So that what has kind of bit Node in the past is for many, many years, JavaScript was just kind of stagnant, didn't do anything. Node helped push that forward, right? That we started to see a lot of activity in there. But then as JavaScript was taking on new things like async await, Node was trailing a bit, right? They didn't take on the spec until the spec was completely ratified. Now you could do some stuff in some flags and whatnot, right?
Yep.
And then we saw Babel, right? Babel let us get the latest and greatest, and then kind of transpile it down to what we expected or what was relevant. The interesting piece here is because it's TypeScript, and I'm not somebody who has done much TypeScript at all. That's essentially you can push that bleeding edge really far because it's TypeScript's responsibility to make sure that it's valid JavaScript.
Right.
So you don't necessarily have to worry about that ratified JavaScript. So
right. Yeah. So back to the example here, we ran Deno run server.ts.
Yep.
And immediately what we'll see is our first permission denied error, and it's that my server wants to allow network access to my localhost, and I had set that on port 8000. So it's complaining that we wanted network access to here, and I don't know if this is going to scroll over, but it'll say, I can zoom out for a second, run again with the allow net flag. And this is a great example of something that needs to be better qualified from a security angle, because certainly I can say, Deno run allow net, but that's going to allow network requests anywhere. If I only want it locked down to, in this case, my local host on port 8000, I need to explicitly say only allow that on 8000. And that's important because of the rest of my example here. So I'm going to reload this here, and I'll try to zoom in here.
So do you have to do that every time you start?
Yes. And again, this is because I don't have some sort of manifest file in which to say whitelist localhost 8000, or even the fact that I want to allow network access, period. There's really no way to know that before running my script.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that I think about is like, well, if all you have to do is pass a flag in, if somebody was to hijack your server or whatever, right? Then it means all they have to do is pass in a flag too.
Right. And so, this as an example. So I'm saying here, if I want to refer something, so my example, what it's attempting to do is if I give it this refer link, I'm going to say that I want it to return whatever content exists at that URL. So I'm going to give it my own website, which is akawebdesign.com, shameless plug. And in this case, now it says, okay, network access has been denied because, again, I didn't whitelist that URL. So that's good.
Yeah, right.
But for the sake of example,
right, you can't.
If I just pull this off
the
of here,
internet.
I mean, if I pull that off of here, it'll allow that to go through. And here you see my website load.
Sure.
So if I didn't want that, I have to then further whitelist on here.
Right.
akawebdesign.com. And again, this will work just fine here. But if I change this to, let's say, like Google,
right,
it'll tell me it's blocked.
And this is
so
how
it's
we
great
end
that
up
it has
cores equals asterisk, because we got tired of like, what in the hell? Just allow them all right now.
But on the other hand, having the asterisk there at least was a pretty clear indicator that this is a regular expression match to anything. When you read a lot of the Deno blogs that are being written over the last couple of weeks as this project has hit 1.0 and is getting some press, they're all telling you just to use AllowNet. In fact, we even see here in what was it? Run with the AllowNet flag. Well, that's terrible advice.
Oh, right.
That should at least be AllowNet equals star, right?
Right.
Or something. So that's that example. I have a third example to dig into. It's called third party. Okay, so in this example, I'm actually going to load content from another domain. So this is another domain that I own, arthurak.com. And I'm going to import some items directly from that. And we'll see what happens in this example. So let's see here. There we go. All right. So again, for the sake of argument here, let me take off this AllowNet flag. We'll just run it. And again, it's getting permission denied. But what's interesting here is, okay, so it's complaining about akawebdesign.com. But if we look at my code, we'll notice akawebdesign.com doesn't exist in this file. It's loading it from arthurak.com. So this is another issue that's kind of concerning to me as a security professional, that if I just look at this file, if I can copy this and get out of here.
I'm not sure I caught that. You were allowing, go back here, you were allowing AKA, and then in your code you had Arthur K.
Right. So let me open this file first, and this will become more clear.
Okay.
If I go to this file, arthurak.com / what did I call this thing? Deno test nested.ts. From here, so this is just a raw file.
Can
that
you
exists on the
zoom in on that a bit? There you go.
From this file.
So this, before you get there, you just pulled up that from in your web browser. You just pulled open this module, which is on one hand sexy. On the other hand, those who aren't in open source world would be freaking out because that feels like code slipping. So but
this is a good.
Yep.
It's a good lesson in, you're solving one problem, but perhaps creating others, right? That, yes, I can go and load this file from anywhere, which is great. It's sexy, but nothing prevents me as the owner of arthurak.com from changing this file with no version history whatsoever, and that might break somebody's script who depends on it.
Yeah, that's the thing that Snowpack and I got to figure out. I keep saying Snowpack. I got to figure out what the other thing is called. They're trying to make that process a little bit easier, but this does put, different. I'm just thinking of like the deployment stack for somebody behind a firewall to say, nope, we got to have our own internal server that says you got
Yeah.
This is where you pull the module from because it's been deployed, and now you got to be on, I don't know, VPN or.
Yeah, and so Deno has a few things around that concept. Not to get too sidetracked, but they do have a concept of caching, and they do have a somewhat rudimentary implementation of locking, where if you wanted to lock this file to a certain like SHA hash, you could do that. But it still isn't really a great implementation, in my opinion, anyways. Nothing to the level that, again, package JSON solves for you by having, distinct version numbers that could be rolled up to the nearest compatible version, or, things like that. So, it's just a different set of problems or solutions, depending on your viewpoint.
Right.
Based on what Deno allows you to do.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing I was trying to raise in this example, though, is that being a third-party script that's just loaded from anywhere, I had no idea looking at let's say, quote unquote, my code here in this third-party thing. I'm loading something from this domain,
right?
But this is going to try to load something from some other domain,
right?
And
now you're responsible for both.
Right. And so that's why we get this kind of cryptic message here. It's like, oh, network access to AKA web design is not allowed. And again, run it with the allow net flag with no further qualification on limiting what you want it to do. And you're going to potentially run into these situations where Node and NPM have gotten a lot of flack for allowing modules to install that do all stuff on your computer, and you really have no idea what's happening during those install scripts. It's really not a different situation with Deno and just loading things from random distributed quote unquote registries, because they're not. They're just scripts, and typically you wouldn't just load random scripts into your web page. I mean, I guess people do.
Well, I was going to say, yeah. Now, if you think about where CSS is going, and you have the ability to have functions in CSS, it's super common to grab something off a CDN, and now that you can execute some of that and some CSS, like that's an interesting vector there as well.
Right. So in this case, again, if I do allow nets, and I'll be smart and put my whitelisted domain on here. In this case, it will spit back to me the HTML from that website. So that's all fine and good. But again, really have to be careful telling people to just put on allow net, because God forbid you're loading a script that loads another script that loads another script, and it's turtles all the way down. Yeah. And eventually you're going to start hitting things or, well, who owns that domain? What's it requesting, and why do we need it? I mean, the fact that you're doing these like uint8 arrays and array buffers. I mean, it would take me easily an hour to sit down and like try to work out what this code did in my head without having to run it, and that's kind of a scary thing, right?
Yeah, and I just put a couple links in the chat of I keep saying Snowpack, but it's the same like crew of people that they've created Snowpack. If you go to snowpack.dev, Pika package, Pika.dev, they're kind of leading the space in some of loading those packages and trying to figure out how to be secure. Just kind of new NPM.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's so. How many of these flags are there? I mean, I almost see this like I gotta write a bash file just to configure all my flags to get things through.
All right, so let me again bump up some font sizes here. If you go to deno.land and look at the manual, where are permissions? Here we go. So there's things like allow read, which can read things from your file system. There's allow write, again, if you want to write something to the file system. Allow net, and those might have been the big three. I don't remember if there were more that I ran into, but those were just poking through the manual, which is mostly what I've been doing the last week. These are really the big ones because you don't want scripts, whether they're Deno scripts or Node scripts or Python scripts or Go, whatever. You don't want them just arbitrarily going out to the net or reading and writing your file system. Those are definitely the big ones there, but there's also no real concept of like role-based access control or anything. It's you can qualify these with, in the case of allow read, you can give it access to your etc directory or your home directory, whatever it might be. But it's kind of an all or nothing thing.
Sure.
Like there's no nuance.
So how has the documentation been?
It's been mostly really good. It's the one thing that I'll give them the most credit for, I think, is that the manual has made it really easy to get up and running. There have been a lot of other blogs that I've read that, kind of go the next level down, which is, how do you create a web server? How do you do WebSockets? They do have some of those examples baked in here down at the bottom. So if you want to do like a TCP echo server, you can see how that looks. It's actually, pretty easy to set up and run, or file server, different things like that. Having said that, there's some holes here. Like you might be like, like a documentation generator. If I'm going to write my own module, let's see what the documentation generator has to say. Oh, there's nothing in it. So it's not to say it doesn't have any lumps, but overall it's been really good. I think the harder thing for me was, like if I had decided not to look at the manual and I went straight into, let's say, the standard library, it's kind of like starting with the MSDN docs, which is, it's just an overwhelming place to start. And if you don't really know what to look for. Now, many of these things are similar to what you would have seen in Node, like we're used to the FS package or HTTP or, but not all of them, like permissions are new.
Right.
I don't know if there is a WebSockets package in Node. I don't remember if there is. But I think these are mostly actually named after the Go standard library too. I think I read that somewhere.
Where, and then I guess this is kind of because we're getting pretty close to time, but this is my kind of last question. Okay, you've built this stuff, and this was the struggle with Go. What do I have to do to run it somewhere?
You basically just install Deno in the same way you'd have to install Node, perhaps on, like if you're running a server anywhere, EC2 or a shared server or your private server.
Right. So if I have control, aka Docker or my own boxes, then I need the Deno runtime.
Yes.
And
that's it.
Well, but then if I want to play in Pazland and I want to upload it to Netlify or one of these function based, either serverless or one of those, I'm going to guess like the same that happened to Go, that adoption isn't there at the moment, which makes it, I don't want to say a challenge, right? If I have to go create an EC2 instance or my own Docker server running out there, makes the little stuff pain in the butt.
It's not quite as widespread, but I know that.
And that's not a knock. I do realize like they just went 1.0, so.
Right. I mean, so I saw this the other day. I think, or maybe it wasn't this one, but there is a
yeah, you'll have to bump that size a little bit.
Oh yeah. So there is support. I want to say it's on Azure for Deno and in their Azure functions maybe. Whereas I don't think I've seen that in AWS or GCP or some of these other places. But yeah, I mean it's still pretty new. So
well, it looks like if I'm reading that right, like push a Docker image. You could do the same thing at GCP with their cloud run. So you would have a serverless container, but it would be your own container configured. Which is I'm not saying that's bad. I mean, we do it for TC, but that being said, like you're not going to just walk out to a Netlify or one of those just yet, or maybe they may have it. I don't know, and just say, "Give me the thing and let's go."
Yep.
That's cool.
Yeah. No, it's definitely good stuff. So I hope that anybody who's still out there listening can kind of kick the tires and give it a shot, because I think it's definitely a project worth checking out, if for no other reason than you can kind of compare and contrast what you know about Node.
Sure. And place to get started, just deno.land.
Deno.land.
Any last parting words for folks?
I mean, I would say, despite the fact it's at version 1, and I guess this is true of just about any tech project in the world, so I shouldn't, pile on to Deno for this, but my definition of 1.0 from a product perspective is not what theirs is. I don't think I would put a production app on Deno today. But I can see myself getting there over the next 3, 6, 12 months if some of my concerns around security and the ability to specify whitelists and permissions and some sort of a meta or manifest file. I think that'll go a long, long way to getting people like me on board. But it's a great project. Kudos to Ryan Dahl and his team for getting the project where it is today. I mean, it's definitely cool stuff.
Yeah, it is neat, and it's things like this that keep us pushing the web forward. So, how about where people can find you?
You can find me all over the web. My website is akawebdesign.com. That links out to Twitter and GitHub and Facebook and everywhere else that you'll find me. Obviously, you'll find me in the That Conference Slack room. And I would think my website's probably the home base, because I link everywhere from there.
And for the foreseeable future, and at home.
Yes. I don't know. I mean, I've been at home for 10 years, Clark, so it's gonna take a while for me to get out of this house.
But you haven't been at home like you are now.
That's true. Now I can't leave the house.
Right. And that feeling isn't great. I was trying to tell Carrie the other day, we were talking about it. She's like, well, it's not like it's much different for us. And in some degrees it's not, except for the fact that now you can't leave. And that almost feels more crushing, because those who have been at home and working at home are used to it, but you at least had like something to look forward to. Like I can leave. Now it's I haven't driven my truck at all.
Yeah. No, I mean, like you can't drag your kids to Walmart or Menards, or you can't hire a babysitter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, Arthur, it is always a pleasure. Thank you for being on and sharing, and thank you to everybody who joined today. We'll get this out and up, and if we got any links and resources, I'll capture that from you, and we'll get it out there. So, Arthur,
Thanks for having me, Clark.
yeah, thank you for the time. I know we had a little rough going, but we managed to pull it off. We got to show code and desktops and side by sides, like it looked like a proper thing.
Nice.
We're better than we were last week, and I have you to thank for that. So thank you. Thank you
Always
for
improving,
joining,
Clark.
and we will see you next time.
See everybody. Thank you.